whoa, whoa, whoa. Wait a minute. Listen. I can already hear you screaming about how cheesy and outdated the effects are. But hear me out. What if I told you it was an effect like this that kick-started the groundbreaking practical effects seen in major motion pictures today? In that case, you might say, what's a practical effect? Well, let me be the one to introduce you to the wonderful world of practical effects in the media industry. Practical effects can simply be defined as techniques or tools that are utilized in the production stage of filming and are not aided with computer software in post-production. But how do directors achieve such mind-blowing scenes in their movies without the help of special computer software? Well, there are actually many components that go into making the Hollywood blockbuster scene in cinema today. In the early days of film, the only effects that could be utilized had to be done in camera. However, this did not deter filmmakers. Limits was just a word that filmmakers were happy to defy. And it all started as early as 1895. The first practical effect ever caught on film was achieved in the simplest way possible, yet opened many filmmakers' eyes to their potential. The Execution of Mary, Queen of Scots, is a very simple 17-second film made by director Alfred Clark in 1895. When the executioner raised his axe to decapitate the Queen of Scots, the director stopped recording, and the actors froze in their spots. Mary was then replaced with a dummy, and the recording began again. So when the executioner brought his axe down, he severed the head of the prop instead of the head of the actor. Even though the director used the simplest means possible to create this effect, it left a lasting impression on the rest of the media industry, and thus, the age of practical effects was born. 6 years later, a trip to the moon emerged and put a wide variety of practical effects to use. Not only was it one of the first films to introduce miniature models, but also incorporated the use of matte paintings, which would go on to be utilized in more iconic films like The Wizard of Oz. Matte paintings are, well, paintings that are used as backgrounds to give the film's world the illusion of size and depth. The film also included cinematic editing techniques such as superimposed images, double exposures, dissolves, and stop-motion jump cuts. This 14-minute masterpiece was an inspiration to filmmakers, and showed just how much could be achieved through in-camera practical effects. Nearly 20 years later, the classic story of Moses was retold through a motion picture called The Ten Commandments, and is remembered for its revolutionary parting of the Red Sea scene. The scene was accomplished by filming water as it poured down two sides of a U-shaped tank. Then the footage was reversed to make the water appear to divide. In order to keep the illusion of the walls of water, the director filmed a close-up of two slabs of gelatin while water was being poured on them to give it a more wet look. This technique brought an astonishing and innovative approach to an old age story, and would later go on to be utilized in the 1956 version of the Ten Commandments. Next we have Metropolis, the film that highlighted and drove scale modeling into the spotlight. The camera was placed close to the scale models to make it seem like they were full-sized buildings. While lights flashed in the windows of the miniature buildings, airplanes flew past the skyscrapers and approximately 300 tiny model cars scooted along the highway. Eugene Scuffton, the man who created the miniature city, also created a new technique known as the mirror trick method. A mirror was set up at a 45-degree angle in front of the camera in order to reflect the image of the scale models that were placed behind the camera. Two different sets were able to merge together because part of the mirror's surface had been scratched away, so the camera had an unrestricted view of the real scenery. Because of this, most of the sets that merged live action and scale models were only half built, meaning a stadium with walls only 10 meters high could look much larger when the scale models merged with the lower half of the shot. These are only some of the techniques and tools that made their debut back in the early days of filmmaking, and they've only gotten better over the years. Yet with all the complexity and detail that goes into these effects, there's always the option of going back to the basics.
This is Tori Seekers reporting to you live from Manhattan. Except I'm not.
The practical effects seen in movies today often take months of preparation and planning, but there are simpler methods that amateur filmmakers can use in their videos.
Examples might be you have to shoot a scene where there is rain, so you might turn a hose on and get a high-powered fan, and it makes it look like rain. There are several things. Fake glass, make out of sugar. If you want to get really, really basic, you can make your own fake blood.
It is said that the best way to save time in post-production is to achieve the shot desired while in the production stage. There is no shortage of simple tricks to alter the image in camera and make it look that much better. Putting various items over the lens is one method.
If you want something soft, you can put a gauze. If you want something with a little bit more of a sepia tone, you can use a nylon stocking. If you want to create a blurred effect around the edge, you can take a filter and put Vaseline around the edge.
Another great tool for amateur filmmakers to use is a polarizing filter, which can be placed over the camera lens in order to make the image look sharper and more colorful in areas with a lot of bright sunlight.
Polarizing filters work by limiting the direction that light can pass through it. So if light's coming from all kinds of different angles, a polarizer will narrow that down.
Another tool that is often used in student films is a squib.
A squib is a hose that's attached to an air pressure pump, and you can strap this inside somebody's shirt and load it with blood. And when the person gets shot, you activate the air pressure squib in timing with that shot to relate that the person has been shot.
They may not be as flashy as cinematic practical effects, but there are plenty of simple tools to help amateur filmmakers achieve the scene they want. Prosthetic makeup, animatronics, and puppetry are a few common tools that are especially prominent in movies of the horror genre to help create lasting nightmares, but they can also be used in many different types of movies for a variety of reasons. An excellent example of a creature that utilized all three of these components was a $500,000 creation named Jabba the Hutt. Two people sat in the torso in order to control the arms, head, mouth, and tongue. The third person sat at the base of the tail and controlled the tail movements. There was also an operator by the camera that had radio controls to move the eyes. The eyes were able to blink, move left and right, and dilate. Another great example of both prosthetic makeup and animatronics is the shark from Jaws. Steven Spielberg was determined to see his vision come to life. However, the mechanical shark did end up breaking down numerous times during shooting, which then delayed the production process. But instead of waiting for the shark to be repaired, Spielberg used this complication to create suspense throughout the movie. He used a technique that implied the existence of the shark without showing the actual shark on camera. Jurassic Park is also credited for its remarkable practical effects, such as the sick Triceratops, which required 8 puppeteers to function, and the head of the T-Rex.
They'll create animatronic dinosaurs versus using character-generated dinosaurs. And one of the reasons cited has been that it's easier to interact with something that's actually there.
The combination of prosthetic makeup, animatronics, and puppetry is a very effective, yet common tool that helps filmmakers create fictitious creatures in their movies. Another technique that is often used in mainstream movies is miniature effects and scale modeling. There was supposed to be a scene in The Dark Knight where Batman's tumbler crashes head-on into a truck. Since this proved impossible to shoot in real life, Christopher Nolan's team built a set of remote-controlled miniatures to create the scene instead. The Lord of the Rings trilogy is also a great example of miniature, or in this case, bigature sets. The entire city of Minas Tirith measured 22 feet wide and 15 feet high. This bigature was breathtaking thanks to its sheer size and attention to detail. And that's why scale models are excellent and detailed effects that have a lot of potential in mainstream movies. Out of all the different types of practical effects seen in movies today, pyrotechnics are definitely the most dangerous to work with.
You've got a whole set full of people, you've got all the pyrotechnics, you've got the crew with several cameras running, because whenever you have pyrotechnics, you better run several cameras.
This is to ensure every single angle of the action is captured, because most of the time, the scene can only be shot once. After the initial explosion, it is very difficult, even impossible, to recreate the scene again.
When you're using real props, real cars, real motorcycles, airplanes, you're always asking for the potential for problems. And it does happen. People get hurt all the time on set. The other hazard of using practical effects is if you get one shot only at doing a take and it doesn't go right. Well, you don't have the luxury of a retake. So you have to hope that you get it right the first time.
A clever use of both pyrotechnics and scale modeling was used in Independence Day. The filmmakers were faced with the dilemma of creating an explosion that encompassed the city's radius. However, fire's natural tendency is to travel upward, not outward. In order to achieve this effect, a miniature city was built in an upright position so the fire would rise through the city streets like a chimney. Charges were set at the base of the miniature city while the camera was mounted 5 feet off the set to capture the explosion. This gave the effect of an explosion without the real-life dangers and demolition of one. Another scene in Independence Day utilized a scale model of the White House, and the film crew was only given one shot to capture the destruction. All the camera crews had to be unmanned as to not risk the safety of those involved, and once the cameras were rolling, the footage had to be slowed down to 300 frames per second, because if the cameras had been running at their normal 24 frames per second, the scene wouldn't have been appreciated for more than 2 frames. Having the reputation of most dangerous practical effect, pyrotechnics can cause major complications on set.
As Newton's law says that, whatever can go wrong will go wrong. I mean, that's just in filmmaking, period. But that's usually the thing with practical effects.
In order to prevent such complications, studios are required to take precaution when using pyrotechnics.
Person using pyrotechnics, number one, has to be certified in pyrotechnics. There will be weapons masters on set, a EMT on set, a fireman on set, and a certified pyrotechnics master to avoid all those dangers.
If you have somebody who's experienced, you're not probably going to have as many issues with it nowadays as you probably did when they first started doing it. But accidents still happen. People can get burned.
While the use of pyrotechnics is hazardous, if handled correctly and carefully, the results of this effect can certainly leave an explosive impression. Each of these techniques and tools can help directors bring an authenticity to their movies that audiences seek. And as the years have progressed, it's certainly clear that some filmmakers have perfected the art of practical effects. In 1981, the Academy introduced a new category to honor complex makeup effects. It was appropriately named Best Makeup, and the first reward was given to Rick Baker for his marvelous work in An American Werewolf in London. The highlight of his work was the transformation scene. A rubber hand was constructed that used animatronics to stretch pneumatically. An entire body was constructed out of rubber that the actor had to pilot with his head sticking out of a hole in the floor. And to simulate the unnaturally quick-growing hair, they simply pulled hair through holes in rubber and reversed the shot, in order to show how the actor's body parts were changing to become more wolf-like. Another film that goes above and beyond with its practical effects is John Carpenter's The Thing. This movie's terrifying monster was made out of an assortment of rubber, paint, foam, and clay. The man behind the monster was named Rob Bottin, and he handcrafted every single effect along with his team. He wanted the creature to be so realistic that actual animal organs were used in filming. These films utilized prosthetic makeup, animatronics, and puppetry to their fullest potential in order to create very terrifying, yet incredibly memorable scenes. While CGI today can easily scale humans down to non-human sizes, there's a clever trick that can do the exact same thing in camera, and that clever trick is known as forced perspective. This technique can simply be defined as the use of set design and camera angles to create the illusion that objects or people are larger or smaller than they actually appear. Peter Jackson used this technique in the Lord of the Rings trilogy. The distance between actor and camera was greatly exaggerated, but the camera was positioned in such a way that the actors looked much closer. In addition, oversized props were used for Elijah Wood's character, and undersized props were used for Ian McKellen's character. Forced perspective may require more work than the CGI treatment, but its authenticity is well worth it. A rotating set is used in movies to give the illusion of no gravity. While Stanley Kubrick's 2001 A Space Odyssey is notable for its gravity-defying jog, there's another example that utilized a rotating set over 10 years before 1968.
Your classic example of a rotating set would be Royal Wedding. Fred Astaire does a scene where he starts dancing on the floor, and then he appears to bounce to one of the walls, and he dances up the wall, and then he bounces to the ceiling, and he dances on the ceiling, and then he bounces to the other wall, and then back to the floor. Fred Astaire is standing upright the entire time. Gravity is keeping him where he has to be. The fact that the room is rotating is what makes this thing work.
The camera was fixed to the set, and the furniture was anchored in place, so when the geared barrel would turn, it would appear as though Astaire was moving around the room and not the room itself. A rotating set may be expensive to build, but its illusion of no gravity is shockingly realistic. There are just some movies that have clever and well thought out practical effects all around. Christopher Nolan is a big fan of practical effects, which clearly translates to his movies. You need look no further than the opening scene of The Dark Knight Rises. Another example of a practical effect that could have been easily done with CGI came from Terminator 2 Judgment Day. In one scene, a hollow swell prosthetic is sitting in front of what looks like a mirror, but is actually a hole into another identical but mirrored room. Sitting in the identical room is the real Arnold Schwarzenegger. These films demonstrated that practical effects can be the more effective choice to create the realism that audiences seek. Practical effects have come a long way since the late 1800s, and they have evolved from simple stop-motion techniques to complex creations in sets. The audience realizes the authenticity in the movies they watch, and because of this, the audience has a better connection to the in-camera effects seen on screen.
There have been several articles that have come out recently where they're showing that there is a return to practical effects. And one of the reasons is it's more realistic.
I feel practical effects always have a good place. If you see an opportunity where practical effect can create an image that you're looking for, a feeling that you're looking for in a camera motion or an angle or the action in the video, give it a try.
Practical effects should still be the industry standard in filmmaking. It will be more believable for the audience.
As long as there are people who are creative and skilled enough to tackle the project, there will always be improvements to practical effects. So while it all may have started with a simple stop-motion trick in 1895, as the years progressed, many techniques and tools were refined and reimagined to create some of the most impressive visuals ever seen on screen. And it's all thanks to the art known as practical effects in the media industry.